This is Dr. Celine, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use NetBeans to create classes, and while doing that I'll give you sort of a review of what goes into a class and how classes are structured. So if you're feeling not super comfortable with object-oriented programming, this is going to give you that review of how classes work, and also it's going to give you some hints on how to let NetBeans do a lot of the work for you, which is always great because nobody wants to type more than they have to. Okay, so here we are in NetBeans, and I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to say Java application next and call it class example, finish. All right, so we have a project here. It's called class example. We've created a package which is called class example, and we have a main class, and you can tell it's main by that little green triangle thing there. And here it is with the main method in it. So we're going to come back to this, but what we want to do now is add a class that represents something in the world that we want to make a program about. So I'm going to say new Java class, and I'm going to use student because everybody has been a student at some point in their lives, and it's an easy concept that everyone can relate to. So we're going to call it student. Okay, and so here we have Java has created this student.java file for us. It's in the package. We don't need to do anything because it's already in this package. It's called public class student. Java docs has been created up here, so I can write up here, this is an example class, and it puts in my name already. Okay, and so now what we want to do is think about what goes in a class. And at the top of a class, we typically declare whatever properties there are. So if we think about the properties of a student, we probably would have the student's name and their ID number and maybe what level they're at, that type of thing. Now, typically, we want to do something called encapsulation, which means we want our properties, the data about this object, to be private so that people outside of this class can't come in and change it without us controlling how that data gets changed. So we're going to do private string name, and then we'll do private int ID, and we'll do, let me see, private char level, and so level will be things like, let me see, so sophomore, junior, freshman, and senior. Oh wait, sophomore and senior are both S's. So maybe we won't do a char. We'll just do, let me see, what else could we do? Let's just actually leave it at this. Let's keep it simple for right now. We'll just do string and int. Okay, so we have our two things. Now we want to actually be able to create students, so we need a constructor, and this is where NetBeans is really helpful. So we'll ask NetBeans to help create a constructor for us, and it'll automatically say, oh, you've got these properties, do you want to fill them in? So the way that you ask NetBeans to help is you right click, and there's this insert code option. So I'm going to click on that, and then I get all these options. So I'm going to say, yes, please generate a constructor for me. And it asks me, do you want to include name and ID as parameters in your constructor? So I'm going to say yes and generate, okay? And see how NetBeans has created this code for me. So I've got these two parameters coming in, a string for name and an int for ID, and they are being assigned to this .name and this .id. So this says these ones here that are part of this class. Okay, so name here is this parameter, and this .name is our property in the class. Okay, so we've got a constructor, and now what you typically want in a class is to be able to provide public access to those properties. So we're going to do this. We're going to, and we do this by creating something called getters and setters. Okay, so getters allow people programming and using this class to get information out of the class, like the name and the ID. Setters allow people outside of the class to set that information. So let's do this. We're going to again insert code, and let's say getter and setter. And we want getter and setter for both of these things. So we're going to say generate, and you can see here that NetBeans created these four methods for me. So the getters all have return types. So getter returns the string for name. The getter for ID returns an int. The setters all have void return types because you're just passing information in, and so they're actually changing this information. So you may say, well, why don't we just make the name and ID public, and then you don't have to do all of this. People could just, change the name and ID directly. But this is what's really important about object-oriented programming, is that you, defining the class, want to have control. So we want to make sure, for example, that when someone sets the ID, they're not setting it with, say, a negative number, because maybe we say IDs run from 0 up, okay? And so by putting this method in here, we can control that. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to control this by saying if ID is less than 0, return. So this is just sort of a validity check. And if somebody passes me an ID that's -3, I'm not actually going to change the ID that's associated with this student. Okay. And similarly, if maybe I want to make sure that nobody changes the student's name to and replaces it with an empty string, so I could do something like this. If name equals empty string, return. So these are sort of validity checks. Oops, name dot equals. We have to do that because with strings you want to use the dot equals. There we go, right? So this is our way of protecting the data that's at the top of the class. Now the last thing that I want to do is actually allow the information about the student to be printed out nicely. So to do this, we need a toString method. So you almost always want a toString method in your class. So I'm going to do insert code and let NetBeans do a toString method for me. And again, I want everything printed out, the name and the ID. So I will generate that. And there we go. So here we go. We have our properties, we have a constructor, and we have our getters and setters and a toString method. You can see this @override is because the Java lang.object class has a toString method which would print something out, but we want to override it because we want to specifically print out this information to say this is going to be a student and the parts of the student are going to be the name and the ID. Okay, so now we've created our class, and that's pretty much all we have to do. It's a very simple class. It doesn't really do much except store information about a student. So we can come back into our code, and we can actually create a student here. So let's see. The way we want to do this is we'll say student S1 equals new student, and we'll pass in Celine, say my ID is 2345. Okay, go. And then we can actually print out information about this. So I'm gonna, another NetBeans hint is if you want to print something out, type SOUT tab, and that will replace with systemout.println, which is very handy, right? And we're just going to pass in S1, okay? So this should print out information about this object, and we will run this and look at our output, and we'll just move the output down to the bottom here. There we go. And so you see that it printed out student, name equals Celine, ID equals 2345. Okay, so I just want to show you what happens if I hadn't put this toString method in here. I can source and comment that out. Toggle comment, there we go, right? And if I go back and I run this again, you'll see that it prints out that there's an object of student class, but it doesn't actually print out anything about the object because it doesn't know how to, because I removed the toString method. Okay, so we'll just untoggle that comment. Okay, and we're good. So now in this main method, we could do all sorts of things. We could create a whole bunch of students, put them in a collection, etc., but that's for another day. What I wanted to make sure that you saw was how you can have NetBeans help you to create a class and to remind you of sort of the general structure of a class. Properties at the top, almost always private, a constructor, maybe you might have a couple of different constructors, and then your getters and setters, any other methods you need, and typically you want a toString method to help print out information about objects of this class. All right, hope that was helpful. Thanks.